This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello. The other day when we did the episode about all the restrictions lifting and the fact that it was very hot, some Australian listeners got in touch to say that basically the opposite is happening in Australia. And one of them was Maddie Jones. Hello, Maddie.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thanks. Well, how are you? And you said it's a bit like a parallel universe. What did you mean?
Completely. Well, it's not so bad today. It's 10 degrees. But on that day, it was 2 degrees in Sydney and it was very cold. And I was very unhappy. And we're in the middle of a 4-week lockdown that looks like it's not going to end anytime soon. But it's still so bizarre because today our Premier stood up at a press conference, declared it's a national emergency. It was all very exciting. And, of course, we had 136 cases overnight.
Which is quite a lot less than we have.
I know, I laugh because every day I listen to you and you say it's 50,000 cases overnight. It's horrific.
Yeah.
But for us, this is dreadful too. So
yeah. And
hopefully we will get down to none, no cases.
How strict is the lockdown? How tough are the rules?
They're not too bad, I think, but they've segregated parts of the city so that for some people you have to have a PCR test every 3 days. We don't make any real use of the antigen tests.
Okay, the lateral flow ones.
Yeah, the lateral flow ones. So there's none of those quick tests available. Everything has to go to a lab. So it's quite different in that way. We're just not set up in the same way that you are in the UK.
And, I mean, we're only just starting to think about what our winter might be like with flu and COVID and cold weather and everyone being back inside. But I suppose that's what you're going through now. And what was the process building up to that like for you?
Look, it happened fairly quickly because we have basically a zero COVID, which is very nice and happy to stick with that, please. But we had some hotel quarantine leaks and then it was Delta and that got away quite quickly. So within about 10 days of the first case, we had lockdown in the area of the city that I'm in and then it spread and now it's much more widespread. And so, yeah, there's a lot more testing. So it didn't take very long to get to where we are now.
Yeah. And then back to the weather. What were you shopping for when we called you up to see if you'd come on?
More socks. I need more warm socks. I can't just wear the, ordinary thin little socks that you wear around. No, I need to wear 2 pairs, especially because I'm at home and it's just, it's not the same as being in the office where it's really well heated all the time and everything. No, more socks.
Oh, and we were all talking about how it's nice to come to the office because it's air conditioned. It really is opposite sides of the world.
Oh, completely. And look, in summer, it's fantastic because I don't have air conditioning at home and the office is brilliant. But at the moment, it's just so cold and it would have been warmer there. This is
actually making me feel quite cool. It's cooling me down. This is very helpful. Well, Maddie, thank you for staying up late for us. Thanks for chatting to us. And thank you very much for listening to us as well.
Well, lovely to hear from you. And that's amazing. Thank you.
Take care. See you soon.
You too. Bye.
Oh, actually, I won't be seeing you soon because it's really hard to get to Australia, isn't it? Really hard.
At the moment, it's very hard, yes. But maybe one day.
Oh, well, virtual hugs for now.
Thank you. Bye now.
And thank you to you too for listening to this episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
It will take some time before we figure out what our new normal is.
Now, if that is the argument, then we are going into unprecedented territory.
Combined with contact testing, tracing. Yes.
I'm a vegan, so of course I don't like meatballs.
Next slide, please. Blair. Lose.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio, and we're recording this episode of Newscast at about 3:30 on Friday, the 23rd of July, 2021. But in the sport world, it's actually 2020 because the long-delayed Tokyo Olympics have finally started. And because we're the BBC, we love a montage. So here's a montage about the slightly rocky road to Tokyo 2020, which is actually in 2021.
The International Olympic Committee has the honor of announcing that the Games of the 32nd Olympiad in 2020 are awarded to the city of Tokyo.
Japan postpones the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics to next year after mounting international pressure.
You also want noisy, passionate fans in a stadium as we did in London. That may not be possible. But if you have the athletes and you have the broadcasters, then you do have a large part of the games.
I believe that not holding the Olympics is even sadder than holding it during these dire times. I do not want to show the world that we have lost to COVID-19.
There'll be no spectators at the Olympic Games in Tokyo after organisers decided to ban them because of rising coronavirus cases.
With 5 days to go, the anti-Olympic protests are not going away.
It's just days before the opening of the Tokyo Olympics, and a growing number of athletes and officials have tested COVID positive or been forced to self-isolate.
Tokyo has recorded its highest number of new daily COVID cases for 6 months, ahead of the Olympics opening ceremony in just a matter of hours.
And so it did finally happen. The opening ceremony has just finished, and it was kind of spectacular in its own strange way. And someone who knows a thing or two about staging an opening ceremony is Martin Green, who's the Chief Creative Officer at Birmingham 2022, the Commonwealth Games next year, but who oversaw the ceremonies for London 2012. Hello, Martin.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Well, thank you for all the amazing memories you gave the country as well. So, did you watch the opening ceremony today? What was your verdict?
I managed to see the first creative bit before they started the athletes parade, and then unfortunately I had to go back to work. But it was really interesting because who would want that job right now to get the tone right at this time with all the challenges that those games have faced? But it was unbelievably beautiful and very moving, and there is nothing like that minimalist Japanese aesthetic to sort of stir the heartstrings. So I'm in awe of my colleagues over there for the endeavour of doing this.
And is that how they managed to handle this tricky moment, by kind of less is more?
I think it looks like it. I think there's been, evidently, an aspect of stripping back from maybe the sort of more spectacle-based things, and I think they've clearly made a very strong decision to do something very simple at this time and to set a tone. I think for the whole games, if you like, because I mean that's the opening ceremony's job, is to set the tone for the games. It felt they were going for sort of let's underplay it and let's let the games talk for themselves over the ensuing 3 weeks and then 2 weeks of the Paralympics.
And friend of the podcast, Dan Walker's here. Hello, Dan.
Hello, how are you all?
Very well, thank you. So that's the quite spectacular but pared back opening ceremony. What about the quite spectacular but pared back BBC studio? Just describe it for us, for people who've not actually seen how it looks.
Well, essentially, a green screen giant studio in Salford, which is the home of various BBC programmes like BBC Breakfast, Match of the Day, all sorts of programmes are made here. All the presenters are sharing the same studio space. So as you can imagine, there's COVID protocols, there's health and safety rules wherever you look. But some funky graphic designers have created a Tokyo skyline behind us.
We should ask Martin for his review of our set, because actually I think it is quite impressive.
I thought it was very cool, actually. Isn't there a shot where you can see through the floor to the space below, as it were, virtually?
Yeah, the whole flooring, Martin, on the top is basically virtual glass cubes, so you can see right the way through the studio. I have no idea how it's done technically. I think actually the idea was that even if we hadn't been in Tokyo, we'd have still used this virtual set. But it's very different for me. My last Olympics was in Rio 5 years ago, and I spent 7 hours a day on the beach in Copacabana just having a chat with Brazilians and medalists and family members. So to be stuck in a studio and actually sat next to one of the gold medalists from that Olympic Games, Sam Quek, is quite surreal. But it's different. I think it's going to be a strange Games. It'll probably be quite a weird one without any crowds in there. But I also think that in 20, 25 years' time, Adam, if you say, do you remember that Olympics in Tokyo? We'll talk about the medals. We might mention that it was the pandemic Olympics, but those medals, those gold medals, those silver medals, the bronzes, the moments, the history, and that's
a virtual studio, but still real sport. Now, Martin, we're all having to make adaptations for COVID. Are you surprised that the games are going ahead? Did you ever think actually they're just not going to happen?
I think I came to the view eventually that something has to kickstart the globe, and something has to say, look, we need to start our journey back. And there are only a few things that can do that globally, and the Olympics is one of them. And so the pragmatist in me sort of was saying, I don't know why they didn't just shunt everything on 4 years. But actually, emotionally, I think, what we're just about, what at their basis, the Olympic Games are an unbelievable demonstration of humanity. And I think someone's got to go first. Someone's got to blink first. And the fact that we're going to spend the next 5 weeks witnessing the best of humanity will probably be good. Quite the best pill and vaccination we could probably all take across the globe at the moment.
Vaccination for the soul. And I have to say, the bit at the end with the hundreds of drones and they're all making this sort of circular shape.
Amazing.
And you're like, oh, what are they going to do? And the music is so powerful. And then it's like, ta-da, it's the globe in drones. And that was your point there, Martin, just being made beautifully visually. Dan was talking about the memories that we'll have in 25 years' time of Tokyo. I've got to ask, what's your favourite bit of the 2012 opening ceremony? Because everyone has their own kind of favourite bit of that magic night.
My one was a small one, actually, which was
the G&T at the end.
When Jake, actually, I did have I had a rather intimate relationship between my stomach and the bin under my desk that night. But J.K. Rowling did a few lines from Harry Potter before we went into a massive sequence. And it had been such a journey to get her to do it because she doesn't do things and she's a very private person and, things like that. And I remember being with her on the day and I just thought it was a really lovely, beautiful little moment that many missed, actually. But it was just very meaningful to me, really.
Well, I'm having dinner tonight with a friend of mine who was in the closing ceremony, and you can and he was under the stage behind Annie Lennox, and you can basically see the whites of his eyes because they were all like painted dark blue or something. And so that's his moment in Olympic history that we never hear the end of.
It's great how those stories come back and back, really. And, my partner ended up got so fed up with not seeing me, he volunteered into the show and used to come home every night and tell me what was happening in the show. And I felt awful saying, I kind of know what's happening in the show. But, he was one of the group who were under the mountain, who came out of the mountain at the beginning of it, and so those stories are fantastic.
Oh, I love that bit.
The Rowan Atkinson moment, I just think was a brilliantly British, but also perfectly aimed, because it was one of those moments that he's, Mr. Bean is a huge star all around the world. So it ticked the global audience box. But also, it's the sort of thing that my kids would have loved, but also my parents would have loved. And there are so few moments, aren't there, where you've essentially got Mr. Bean playing one note on the piano, but it just worked beautifully. It was funny, it was surprising, and I think everybody would have laughed. But it was also part of this incredible opening ceremony, which was put together so beautifully, which just tugged on every single part of your emotions as you watched it. It made you feel proud to be British, it made you laugh, it made you cry, but it also gave you that incredible excitement about what we were going to see over the course of the next few weeks. And if an opening ceremony ticks all those boxes, I think it sets you up perfectly for a great Games, and it certainly did that in 2012.
Martin, you've got an opening ceremony of your own to organise, so I'll let you get back to that, but thank you very much.
We have, thank you very much. It's 1 year to go to the Birmingham Commonwealth Games on Wednesday. So we're about to show the world how it's done again. And we're really excited about that. And keep your eyes on the skies of Birmingham, because you may see something drone-like as well. So we're very excited about that.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you. Dan, let's talk about some sport now. What are your feelings about Team GB this year? Because, we've kind of got used to Team GB being actually pretty good.
Yeah, I watched a really fascinating documentary about sort of Britain's Olympic journey. And it's interesting how it's all sort of crosses swords with politics as well. It goes back to the sort of mid-1990s when John Major at the time, I think it was 1994, was sort of instrumental in setting up the National Lottery. And then after our absolutely shambolic performance in Atlanta in 1996, where we won one single gold medal, the decision was made, and this was, John Major was instrumental in that, was made to divert a lot of that National Lottery funding into Olympic sports, because I think he had cottoned on to the idea, which, everybody knows, that if you can almost engineer sporting success in a country, it makes a huge difference to how people feel and how they feel about, the party in power. And, we've seen that with the European Championships, the football this summer. And we've had that huge lift in 2012 and in 2016 with Rio. But go back to Sydney, the Games after Atlanta in 1996. In 1996, Adam, the athletes came back and there was nobody there at the airport to see them apart from their families. There was no crowd. Every single paper had headlines about them, ruining the Olympic spirit, about them failing, about batons dropped, and about gold medal hopes dashed. In 2000, those airports were packed, and people like Kelly Holmes were coming back, and they were cheered. And there was a huge lift in the country. The same in 2004. And then our Olympics are sort of built and built and built. And then in the last two Olympic Games, we finished third in 2012 and second in the medal table in Rio in 2016. That is phenomenal. And a lot of that money is all traced back to the 1990s when the National Lottery funding came in. And so many athletes. You think of Sir Chris Hoy. Sir Chris Hoy loved ET. On the back of that, got a BMX, got into cycling. And then one day he got a phone call from the UK Sport, which was set up to administer that lottery funding. And they said, we have decided that, and you are an athlete, we're going to give you £10,000 for the year. And that transformed his life. And here he is now sitting in a BBC studio talking about the opening ceremony, having won a series of incredible medals and inspired so many other young boys and girls to get into cycling. That is legacy. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and he's a total legend.
It is brilliant. And the thing I think you would enjoy most about these Olympic Games is, I've interviewed you on the telly on numerous occasions, and you've held up, a Brexit binder or some notes from, some meeting that you've been to covering all the negotiations going on in Europe. I'm going to drop the BBC Olympic Bible on the floor to give you an idea of how weighty it is. Are you ready? From a height of about 12 inches.
Oh, wow.
What we have here, Adam.
I'm thinking that's 300 to 400 pages.
You would be entirely incorrect. It's actually 901 pages in length, and it's been compiled by the brains and the wonderful humans at the BBC Sport stats department. It takes months. They've been working on this, well, more than months. They've been working on this for years. They've got stats and facts on every single athlete competing in these games. There's history in there. There's information about origins of individual sports. There's information in there about venues, about how much food they'll eat at the Olympics, about what goes on in the athletes' village. There is everything you could ever want to know about the Olympics contained in this Bible.
Brilliant.
So if you see me poring over this in the BBC studio, you'll understand why.
Get the highlighter pens in. And I look forward to going through the
It's all over it already.
I look forward to going through the whole thing with you over the next few weeks. Have an amazing time. It must be a brilliant, brilliant thing to work on, just knowing that it's making everyone so happy.
It's fantastic. It's something which I watched as a kid. I loved the Olympic Games growing up, and now to work on it, it's just an absolute privilege. Even though it's like I say, slightly strange games, but I'm sure there'll be some brilliant memories and things we'll talk about for years.
Totally, and I look forward to talking with you about them. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Adam. See you soon.
Cheers. Have a good couple of weeks then. And I'll see you our usual slot in September.
Perfect. Cheers, boss.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
I tell you what, our COVID book club is going great guns. After the book from the women who made the Oxford vaccine, we've now got Spike, The Virus versus the People, The Inside Story, which is written by Jeremy Farrar, who's the boss of the Wellcome Trust, who's also on Sage and who's been on Newscast before. And he's on Newscast again to talk about his new tome. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello.
Have you been into a bookshop to see the book on the shelf yet?
I haven't, I'm afraid. No,
Okay.
No, I haven't.
Okay, fair enough. Now, it just takes us through the journey that you've been through this pandemic. And at the start, I mean, you were actually going around with a burner phone. So basically another mobile phone that no one knew was you. Why was that?
It seemed, you sort of say that now in July 2021, and it seems sort of slightly surreal. It's just important to remember what it felt like in the beginning of 2020 when there was President Trump in the White House and tensions between America and China, and a clearly awful pandemic brewing starting in Wuhan in China. It feels odd now, but at the time it was a frightening experience. Yeah,
you did it because you didn't feel safe.
I think I say this in the book somewhere. I'm not quite sure why I did it. It's a bizarre feeling to think. I've not felt like that before in my life. Just not quite sure that as a doctor and as a scientist, you're not used to being in that sort of position. But it felt a very unusual position to be in. It's actually difficult to remember quite what I was thinking at the time, but it didn't feel very comfortable, no.
Well, yeah, because you were doing like 29-hour days by the signs of things. What surprised me about that period is just how sort of ad hoc it all was. Like, it's just luck that you happen to know certain people and have their numbers and check a website on a certain day to see something being uploaded that meant that you and we knew what was going on.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. And I think that is something to reflect on, is that the sort of ad hoc nature of it, going from the very first reporting of it, which has been true for many of these epidemics of the last 20 years. You know, it gets picked up on social media, it gets reported through ProMed as they scan the world's social media and news outlets. And there is a formality to it, of course, through the WHO and the international health regulations. But in those first few days, which can be so critical, it can feel, and is actually, a little bit ad hoc. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect on, how to formalize that so it doesn't depend on individuals knowing each other or getting in touch or whatever.
And you were at Davos at the World Economic Forum at the start of 2020, the big conference at the top of the mountain. And you wrote some thoughts down about how the pandemic could progress on a napkin, which you then threw away. But can you remember what was on the napkin, and is it what ended up happening?
It largely what was happening. I mean, even though I felt in January 2020 that this had all of the hallmarks of the one that, you know, many people had warned about for a number of sort of scientific reasons, this had every single red flag you could imagine flashing. Even with that knowledge, none of us could have predicted exactly what's happened over the last 18 months, the scale of it, the impact, and the impact, you know, not just on health, on people who have tragically got ill and died, but the whole of the economy, the whole of geopolitics, the whole of trade and travel and education and everything else. I mean, it has been a period of history which has been dreadful to live through, and very uncomfortable.
And then the history continues, and we get to March 2020, and you go to this thing that most of us had never heard of called SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group for Experts. And there was a particular SAGE meeting on Friday the 13th of March. Can you just take us into the room and just tell us what it was like there?
Yeah, I mean, SAGE has now become common parlance, but there's never been a SAGE that's lasted for this long. I think it's now essentially started in January, and here we are in July, and there are still SAGE meetings. I think SAGE has been a remarkable organisation, and I think Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty deserve enormous credit for the way they've handled it. The fact that they've insisted on the minutes, the summaries being made available in real time, the 300 or 400 people that feed into SAGE and give advice to it, whilst also doing all of their day jobs as well. It's been a remarkable group of people coming together. And I think inevitably SAGE won't have got everything right. And, when inquiries come in the future, the advice and how it's given and how it's fed up into government. But I've got nothing but admiration for the way Patrick and Chris have chaired SAGE and kept it together and kept it very focused on what it can really contribute to the discussions.
And you came very close to resigning from SAGE as an advisor, which, I mean, take it from me, that would have been a massive news story if you'd done that.
Yeah, and should you resign? Should you stay in? It's a question that I, asked myself a number of times. I'm sure that others in similar circumstances on this SAGE and in the past have faced similar questions to themselves. But I go back and I think the idea of remaining in the tent, continuing to give that advice. It's absolutely right that scientists advise and government decides, and that's where the decision making should lie. And I think on the whole, it is better to remain giving that advice rather than, yes, the news headlines might have happened or not, but then that advice would not have been factoring into any of the discussions. And I think it's better on the whole to accept that you're an advisor, not a decider, and that to remain giving that advice where it's appropriate into SAGE. And frankly, out of respect for the way, again, as I say, respect out of the way for the way Patrick and Chris handle SAGE and encouraged everybody to speak their mind and not drop into groupthink or anything else, but to challenge each other. And I think that there's a respect there for colleagues on SAGE and also the leadership of it.
And you're involved in so many aspects of this, whether it's working with the WHO on that tools program to make sure all the countries have the right tools at their disposal, whether it's COVAX to make sure that vaccines get around the world to other countries. And we could talk about hundreds of those things, but just to spell out for me your idea you've got that maybe actually you get some smaller, rich countries to kind of be the hubs for vaccines. Explain to me what that's about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's come out here is just the inequitable distribution of vaccines. And really that goes back to science of vaccines, but critically to the manufacturing. If you can have the greatest science in the world, but if you can't manufacture drugs and vaccines in this case, then you can't distribute them. And at the moment, the global manufacturing base is very small. If you look at where manufacturing for vaccines happens globally, it's India, it's China, it's the United States, some degree in Europe, essentially none on the continent of Africa, apart from yellow fever, some in Brazil, but nowhere near enough for the whole continent. And I think we're going to have a much better distributed manufacturing capacity in the world in the future so that we're not reliant on big population countries. You can understand why India, with a population of 1.4 billion, if it has a vaccine capacity manufacturing, it's going to want to use it for its own citizens first. And, that's understandable. So, it's an idea. I don't know if it will gain traction, but it's an idea that we could have a global network of what I've called small population countries who would have this vaccine manufacturing whereby they could produce for their own citizens very quickly and could be providing for the world almost immediately. Singapore, Costa Rica, Denmark, Senegal, Rwanda, countries that would give you a truly global distribution of manufacturing.
And they just wouldn't have that enormous pressure of vaccinating their own enormous populations first. Really, really interesting. I've just looked on the government dashboard for today for the latest COVID stats, and there were 36,389 positive cases yesterday. Now, that to me looks like maybe a plateau, maybe even a bit of the start of a dip. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at the trends rather than individual days.
Yeah.
There may be reasons why day to day, the variation. We don't yet know what, if any, implications are going to be for the lifting of restrictions on the 19th of July. We won't know that for 2 or 3 weeks. And so I think it's the data over the next 2 or 3 weeks that's important. Transmission remains very high in the UK. The Office of National Statistics just released their figures today. I think 800,000 people infected last week. So, there's a lot of infection going on in the UK at the moment, and it's likely that may well continue for some time. But thankfully, the vaccines have been extraordinarily good at stopping infections leading to illness, leading to hospitalizations. And just imagine if we had the level of current transmission in this country and we had not had such a successful vaccine program, we would be facing enormous pressure on the NHS now.
And Jenny Harries has been talking today about why people should still isolate if they get pinged in the pingdemic, a word I imagine you don't like very much as a professional.
We know that you're 5 times more likely to become a case yourself if you've been a close contact. And this is the way that we can stop transmission occurring. So it's doing what it should be doing, whilst recognising it is an inconvenience for many people, but the right inconvenience.
Yeah, do you think that the August the 16th loosening of the isolation rules, if you're a contact of a positive case, should that go ahead, or is that a bad idea?
Yeah, I think that we've got to remember that the NHS app was developed in a different phase of this pandemic when we didn't have vaccines. And I think the move to allow some re-looking at that app at the moment and some loosening for essential workers, I think that does make sense. Go back to what again, Chris Whitty, I think, said about just as we come off the restrictions on the 19th of July, just take it really gradually and cautiously. We don't want another wave developing through August and then coming to September. Schools go back to school, the seasons change, the other respiratory infections come along. So I think it is reasonable to do this gradually, to stagger it, to lift some essential things today, like in the last few days around the app, but to keep to the 16th generally.
Now, it's a really enjoyable book about a very difficult time, but I've discovered we've got a couple of things in common. First of all, we both use a lot of exclamation marks in emails because you publish quite a lot of your emails. I do that too. And we both love skiing. Do you think we'll be able to go skiing in the next ski season? Will Europe be open up enough and British people welcome enough and things kind of safe enough that we'll be able to go skiing?
I certainly hope so. And it's in our hands. It's in our hands. Vaccines available and vaccines used and accessible and reducing transmission. And I think if we do that, the vaccines will change the nature of this pandemic in the countries that they're available in.
And do you think the vaccines are holding, both in terms of the immunity they give you as a person over time and also the immunity they have against the variants?
Yeah, the vaccines are incredible advance in science. Sarah Gilbert and Andy Pollard in Oxford and AstraZeneca. I mean, the companies Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca deserve enormous credit. The vaccines are incredibly good at stopping you getting ill, going to hospital and dying. I mean, they remain incredibly effective, including against the Delta variant if you've had both vaccinations. We need to make sure we're doing the science to develop second and third generation vaccines so that if new variants do come along, which evade these vaccines, that we will have other vaccines that can protect us in the future. And the holy grail now really is to develop a vaccine against all of the beta coronaviruses. And that would be, as with a pan-influenza vaccine, a massive scientific breakthrough.
And is that a realistic prospect?
Yeah, I think it is. Perhaps more, in fact, for the beta coronaviruses. The influenza is still a real challenge because of how variable and changeable it is season to season. But I do think a pan-beta coronavirus vaccine is potentially feasible. And it's certainly something that, governments around the world, CEPI, ourselves are working on to try and give long-lasting immune protection after a vaccine for a beta coronavirus that would cover ones we know about and hopefully ones we don't know about.
Well, that would be amazing. Jeremy, thank you for the book and hopefully see you on the slopes or if not in a bookshop fairly soon.
Yeah, thanks very much.
I'm also thinking we should come up with a name for our COVID book club. I was thinking the National Shelf Service. Boomtish. Right. I know you're always looking for new, interesting podcasts to listen to, and I've got a recommendation for you. If you go to BBC Sounds, there is a season marking 10 years since the death of Amy Winehouse, and there's a series of podcasts talking about her life and her work and her legacy, and one of them is presented by her friend, Nick Grimshaw from Radio 1, and he's here now. Hello, Grim.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. This is really bittersweet, isn't it? Because these shows about Amy are amazing, but it's a sad thing to have to do. Or maybe you don't see it as a sad thing.
Yeah, it was a bit of a funny thing for me. Like you say, it was first of all, yeah, it is a sad thing. It's really sad, and then also it's not something, I don't know, like it's kind of something that I've not really not thought about, because I do think about her a lot, but I think like not really addressed. And I definitely not delved into her music or enjoyed listening to her music since. It's been quite weird actually the past few weeks going through the Amy archive and sort of revisiting those times of hanging out in Camden in 2006 through to when she passed away. But it's been I don't know, like it's been probably a great thing to do as well, and obviously a great thing to do for her because we were friends. But aside from that, as a fan of music, I'd want to honor someone like Amy anyway. And I think that someone like Amy is such a rarity in their songwriting and their openness to have that ability to share their feelings and to turn them into these songs that just manage to connect with so many people the world over. So it's been actually really special to sort of re-listen to all those records that I loved and fell in love with the first time, that I've kind of just tried to ignore for 10 years.
Let's have a little listen to your episode.
And I thought a nice way to start would be right at the very beginning. One of the first times I was made aware of Amy. I'd heard her on the radio like a little bit, but I remember seeing her on Jools Holland one night and being totally in awe of her. We had the telly on, and I remember in the room, like one by one, we all sort of fell quiet, and all of a sudden everyone had just shut up, and we just listened. And like I say, we didn't know who it was. We were like, who the hell is that?
Amazing. How do the songs sound differently now, both because of like the passage of time and the passing of her?
I mean, the songs, like they, at the time, like when I first saw her, as I was just saying in that clip then, when I first saw her on Jools Holland, I think she was 19, so I would have been 18. And I remember seeing her on the telly and just not really ever seeing anyone like that on the telly, you know, like she was so like distinctive and sort of so full of, you know, gumption and bravado and so ballsy. And then these songs were the sort of polar opposite, you know, they were so really delicate and in their sentiment, not in their delivery, but in their sentiment, and very open and very vulnerable. So I don't know, it was like I'd never really seen anyone like that or heard anyone like that. But I think that the thing that we discovered of delving into the archive of playing loads of live stuff that she did through the BBC was that the key thing was like her honesty, and like that's, you know, quite rare, I think, in an artist that they're so brutally honest. And she said in a doc that I know that she's done for Six Music was, you know, when she wanted to start making music, there was nothing that she felt was saying how she felt. Everything was just pop songs written by other people and someone else sung them, and they didn't really mean anything. And she sort of took the challenge on to write songs about exactly how she felt as a challenge. And she said it was like a hard challenge, and you know, she did it because no one else was really being that honest. So the songs are, and it's funny, like I guess it's the naivety of youth at the time. I was like, oh yeah, the songs are really good. And we'd go to the gigs, and we'd go to, you know, when she'd be in London, we'd go every single night, and we'd be bloody talking like when she's performing, or like, you know, I remember we went like 5 nights on a trot at Shepherd's Bush. I was like, I probably didn't pay attention for one night for the full show, and
history was unfolding in front of your eyes.
Do you know what I mean? It's so bad. And then now when I listen back, I'm like, wow, those songs are absolutely incredible. Like some of them are like truly perfect. Some of them are like my favorite songs in the world, let alone like, you know, contemporary songs. Like they're really, really gut-wrenchingly honest and open.
Well, thank you so much for making this show in this series, and thanks for all the years at Radio 1, which are drawing to a close.
I know.
So first Dino, then you. There's going to be no one left. Tumbleweed.
I know. Probably have to close the place down, won't they?
No, I'll keep the lights on. Right, have a good weekend and see you soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
And now the final frame. Love is a losing game. Thank you.
Newscast from the BBC.
Well, thank you for making it to the end of another newscast. You clearly ooze stamina. Can I gently encourage you to subscribe to us on BBC Sounds, and then, without having to do anything else, our meandering chat will miraculously make its way to your phone.